The first-class lounge aboard Titanic and her twin sister ship Olympic were one of the most noble rooms on the Grand Ocean Liner, and perhaps the most magnificent apartments ever built at sea. It was situated upon the promenade deck and centered between funnels 2 and 3 to maximize comfort and location for Titanic's elite passengers. The lounge was a large room, 59 feet long and 63 feet wide. The space cut into the boat deck above, making the room 12 feet 3 inches high. The interior designers for Titanic, Alden Heaton and Company, who had worked with Harland and Wolff and the White Star Line on previous ships, outfitted the lounge. Like many public rooms aboard Titanic, the lounge was a descendant of a room aboard an earlier liner. It was common for the designers to reproduce the popular features from their successful ships into their newest, larger generations, with a few tweaks, such as expanding the space and new features. Oceanic's first-class library was an earlier version of Titanic's first-class lounge. Some decor elements, such as the carvings, fixtures, clocks, and the grand bookcase, were almost identical. However, Titanic's lounge was much larger than Oceanic's library, so there are many more exciting pieces of decor to discuss. The space's overall design is in the Louis Quinze style, with details taken from the Palace of Versailles in France. The woodwork is English oak, the same oak used in the grand staircase, other first-class apartments, and even second, third, and crew oak spaces. The carvings in the lounge were some of the most outstanding and intricate aboard the ship. The boiseries were surrounded with details all carved by hand. Motifs broke the panels containing musical instruments: violins, lyres, citharins, bells, and musical scrolls. Everywhere one looked were ribbons, scallops, fruit, and flowers. Every detail was exemplary. Plasterwork had the right amount of gilded leaves, instruments, and ribbons in the proper places to stand out against the white painted ceiling panels. And above the 2 entrances to the lounge and doorway to the pantry were incredibly ornate panels with musical elements, fantastic scrollwork, and a mascaron insert. Above the doorway to the forward corridor, which headed to the grand staircase, was a very special panel. Please remember this one. The room was illuminated and ventilated by 20 large windows of 2 types in 4 bays and 4 corners on the outboard sides. Because of the heightening of the room into boat deck above, the windows were divided into 2 sections. The lower, more prominent, and in most cases opening sections were leaded with an elongated diamond design and protected by an exterior glazing overlooking the promenade deck. The boat deck had clerestory windows, which were curved and arched, were made of leaded stained glass featuring some fantastic art of minstrels. They are singing, telling stories, playing instruments, and entertaining. Now, if the lounge became too cold, all these windows were shut and the heat would be turned on. The steam radiators along the base of the walls, covered by pierced brass decorative grills, kept delicate passengers toasty warm. When night fell upon the lounge, electric illumination was aided by sconces and ceiling fixtures. 51 3-light Louis XV ormolu bracket sconces adorned the walls. In contrast, 4 oval and 8 ornamental orvalue electroliers with shaped cut and engraved glass panels, each with 8 light bulbs, graced the room's bays, corners, and sides. In the center, housed in its small decorative dome that made the room even higher, was a massive ornamental ormolu oval electrolier with cut and engraved glass panels and cut glass bead dressings. This impressive electrolier was one of the largest fixtures aboard the ship. It had 48 light bulbs, with 16 hanging separately, housed with engraved glass shades and bead festoons. Hidden in the cupola for the electrolier behind the decorative mesh was ductwork for the ventilator on boat deck above, which expelled any stale air and heat generated from all the incandescent bulbs within the room. The final element of the lounge, which might have generated some illumination, was the fireplace. On the forward wall was a beautiful, faux Campagnes Verts marble fireplace. It extended out from the bulkhead with an equally remarkable carved oak surround. Festoons, garlands, and more hand carvings of oak were placed above the fireplace and framed with a large mirror. While the fireplace was fake, it was electric and generated heat, at least on Britannic, and possibly a faux flame effect, with the use of a light bulb and a small motor hidden in the fake coal. The hearth encompassed a pair of andirons in the shape of urns, and a decorative dog grate that held the phony coal. On top of the mantel sat 2 more decorative marble urns, or cassolettes. Centered was a bronze statuette, a copy of a much larger version now housed in the Louvre. She was possibly produced by the Barbedienne Foundry. She was Diana of Versailles. She sat bolted proudly on the mantle. Remember Diana for later too. She is essential. Many of these elements from Olympic's lounge, identical to Titanic, the paneling, ceiling, windows, sconces, light fixtures, and even fireplace, can still be found today. Most are in the White Swan Hotel in Alnwick, England. If you need to visit one Titanic-related location to feel how it was aboard the ship, it is the White Swan Hotel. Now, the lounge had to serve a purpose besides looking beautiful and unique: to provide first-class passengers with a retreat to relax and spend time idling away as Titanic crossed the sea. Each class had a room with this purpose, but Titanic's first-class passengers had several more options after paying more. And that meant the lounge ended up not being as popular as the other choices, like the reception room on D-Deck. However, the primary role of the lounge was to be a centralized spot to come and quietly and politely socialize with fellow passengers or read a book. There were many secluded corners in the room, and there were 96 seating options, from arm and tub chairs, French settees, Chesterfields, and more to pick from. Comfortable furniture was furnished in jade and gold velvet, framed in mahogany, with matching pillows, which also matched the carpeting for the room. The lounge was also intended to be a casual gaming location. The tables were set up for chess, checkers, and card games. 11 felt-top squared card tables, with 4 scallop chip holders in the corners, let the casual bridge and poker players enjoy a friendly game or two. Tea and beverages were also served within the lounge, yet one would not make this room their go-to spot for tea time. Proper tea time would require a table full of saucers and silverware, including a tablecloth for your benefit. Just a shy 10 oblong tables allowed for this to happen in the lounge, and while Shipbuilder magazine said tea could be taken in this room, it seems less practical for a full tea spread with sandwiches and the trimmings. If you needed a snack, just ask a steward though. The lounge had 2 wall-mounted glass candy cabinets, perhaps for displaying the options to enjoy, or more realistically, White Star's items to obtain and purchase. However, the lack of tea time was due to the lounge's function as a library. White Star provided a collection of books for their passengers to enjoy. The system to check out books was similar to the local library you know today. These were novels of the day and great classics bound in White Star binding, and periodically, the library was switched out, so if one were to find themselves sailing aboard Titanic again later, the choices would differ. All the books were kept in an enormous, finely carved mahogany bookcase, forward of the third funnel. The bookcase was richly detailed and crowned with a shell pediment. 5 glazed paneled doors enclosed the 5 shelves, and underneath the bookcase were 12 cupboards. The cupboards provide excellent storage for the various magazines, newspapers, stationaries, and board games that were all provided for the lounge. Flanking the bookcase were 2 magnificent cartel ormolu ornaments. On the port side or right of the bookcase was a clock connected to the ship's magneta system. And to the left of the bookcase, on the starboard side, was a date indicator. It wasn't a barometer. These were also in the Louis XV style, and the clock had a figure that represented the god Mars, while the date indicator had the goddess Venus. Unlike many of Olympic's fine fittings, the clock and the date indicator have not been seen since she was scrapped. The final purpose of the room was to allow passengers to write their post and correspondence. In the outboard bays of the room were 4 writing desks. Each desk allowed for 2 passengers at a time to write on White Star Line stationery, envelopes, with provided pens, privacy, and light from a small yet lovely lamp. Everything they needed to say to their friends and loved ones back home. If you couldn't see what the date indicator said next to the bookcase, you luckily had right in front of you on the desk a date indicator. When you were done writing all the tea from your voyage to your best friend back in Bristol, you could give your letters to the steward, or drop them off as you left for the grand staircase, as a post office box sat right next to the door, under that lovely decorative panel. You couldn't miss this post office box. There was a sign that said "Letters" adjacent to the slot where you could deposit your letters. Now, we can only assume that the lounge aboard Titanic was identical to Olympic's, except for the minor differences from the touch of a carpenter's hand in their carvings. So what happened in the lounge during Titanic's voyage, especially on that infamous night? Throughout the voyage, Titanic's passengers enjoyed the room daily from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., sometimes staying open late when a stray passenger or two insisted on finishing a letter or just couldn't end their bridge game. Activity in the room would have become a routine. and those same occurrences would have been entertained on Monday, April 15th. Famously, passengers were ordered up with their life belts on after the unthinkable occurred. With the general sense of confusion, many found their way to the one room they utilized throughout the voyage as their hub for connecting and socializing, the lounge. Reopened quickly after the impact with the berg, passengers swarmed inside the relatively warm room. No one initially wanted to head out on deck into the cold midnight air. Steward tried to persuade passengers to leave the room and head for the boat deck where the lifeboats awaited women and children. One passenger, Edith Rosenbaum, had left the lounge earlier that night. After finding it too difficult to reach the boat deck due to a crowd swarming a set of stairs, and was now sitting comfortably in the lounge once more. The room was crowded at first, but slowly it emptied. Eventually, Edith sat alone in a big easy chair. Just her and her mascot, a soon-to-be famous toy pig her room steward, Robert Wareham, had just fetched for her.
But I ended up sitting there for only about 5 more minutes. I am glad I didn't stay longer, or I might not be here today. As I looked around that lovely room, I began noticing it seemed to be on a slant. The deck was lopsided, sort of leaning toward the bow. This alarmed me, and I got up.
We can assume several things happened in the lounge after Edith left it around 1:20 a.m. Sometime later, a wandering steward must have checked the room. He then extinguished the lights in the lounge and its connecting corridors forever, as the lights in the forward corridor are still intact 2 miles below the surface. Titanic had little time left, and neither did the lounge. The forces killing Titanic had a terrible fate in store for this most beautiful room. As the bow of Titanic plunged around 2:15 a.m., a wave of water made its way aft on the boat deck. The stern rises, and the stresses inside the ship continue to reach a literal breaking point, ripping the room in twain, splintering magnificent carvings, popping panels off bulkheads, shattering stained glass, tossing jade and golded furniture like toys, all before submerging this example of Gilded Age opulence into the depths of the North Atlantic. On its way down to the bottom, the room found no respite. The tremendous force caused by the flow of water rips away what is left from the bow. Windows and light fixtures are teared off of their foundations and scattered into the debris field. The fireplace and mantel are subjugated to unimaginable forces as the wall between the lounge and reading room is jettisoned out of position by the water. The beautiful ornaments atop the mantel tossed and bounced through the maelstrom inside Titanic before finding their way far from the ship, resting in the mud of the ocean floor to be unseen again for almost 80 years. Days and weeks after the sinking at the surface, a few pieces of flotsam remain from this once remarkable room. Carved woodwork, some pillows, one piece of delicate paneling is recovered and saved. Perhaps it is the most famous artifact from Titanic. Until now. Today, Titanic's lounge within the bow of the wreck is gone. Instead, we explorers and researchers turn to the debris field to find remnants of Titanic's beauty. There, scattered all around and far from the ship, are examples of the magnificence that once was in 1912. Beauty is repeatedly found in this dark, cold, unforgiving environment, found again after being lost over 30 years ago. This beauty, which once sat atop the magnificent mantel, now lies half buried in the mud, gazing up towards the surface, longingly. She has been hopeful and waiting for her rescue for over a century. Will her rescue ever come? Or will she remain at the bottom of the ocean for all eternity?